The hall was silent, the kind of silence that makes the air feel heavy, as if every breath carries weight. Sandra Bullock stood on the stage, her hands slightly trembling, though she tried to hide it behind her calm smile. The audience expected her usual charm, her humor, her warmth. But that night, she chose something different. She shared her fear. "I am afraid of losing myself," she said softly, her voice shaking but clear enough for every ear in the hall. "Sometimes the world feels too loud, too demanding, and I wonder if one day I will forget who I truly am." The words cut through the air. People who came expecting light-hearted moments now leaned forward, their hearts pulling closer to her confession. Fear, when spoken by someone admired, feels both strange and deeply relatable. Many in the hall thought of their own hidden fears, the ones they never dared to say aloud. Sandra looked down for a moment, gathering courage, then continued. "I am afraid that in trying to be strong for everyone, I may never admit when I am weak. I fear that kindness can sometimes look like weakness, and I fear that love once lost cannot be found again." There was a pause, a long, aching pause. The audience didn't clap, didn't whisper. They only watched. And then, slowly, Keanu Reeves, who had been seated quietly in the front row, stood up. Keanu didn't rush to fill the silence with noise. He waited, as if giving respect to her words, as if letting them echo long enough for everyone to feel them. His eyes met hers, steady, calm, filled with something the room could not yet name. He spoke in his gentle way, no show, no loudness, just sincerity. Sometimes silence is the only answer fear understands. Fear grows when we fight it too hard, but it softens when we sit with it. "Sandra, what you shared tonight is not weakness. It is strength. You gave everyone here permission to feel human." The hall stayed still. Every person felt the weight of his words. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. No judgment, no pity, only kindness. Sandra's eyes watered, not from sadness, but from relief. She had risked showing her true self, and in return she was met with understanding. Someone in the back clapped softly. Another followed. Within moments, the hall filled with applause. Not the kind for a performance, but the kind that rises when people feel something deep together. Sandra smiled through her tears, whispering, "Thank you," and Keanu, still standing, nodded and said, "Thank you for trusting us." Yet, beneath that calm exchange, something more powerful had begun. The audience didn't know it yet, but this night would change how they saw kindness, strength, and fear forever, because what started as one woman's confession and one man's gentle answer would soon lead to a journey none of them expected. A journey of broken truths, hidden stories, and the kind of silence that could heal or destroy. This was only the beginning. The applause faded slowly, like waves retreating from the shore, but the silence that followed felt heavier than before. Sandra stood frozen, her heart racing in her chest. The hall full of people wasn't just listening anymore. They were holding on to every breath, every pause, as if waiting for what would happen next. She looked at Keanu. The way he stood there wasn't dramatic, it wasn't staged. He wasn't trying to save the moment or make himself look noble. He simply stood with her, sharing her fear without trying to erase it. That alone felt like the most powerful gesture of all. "I thought I was the only one carrying this weight," Sandra whispered, her voice breaking again. Though softer now, Keanu shook his head gently, his eyes steady but kind. "You're not. We all carry it. The only difference is that some of us hide it better than others." A murmur ran through the audience. People shifted in their seats, not because they were restless, but because the words forced them to look inward. Suddenly, the stage wasn't about fame, it wasn't about Hollywood lights. It was about something deeply human. A man in the third row wiped his eyes. A young woman in the back clutched her friend's hand. Someone whispered, "He's right." Sandra felt her throat tighten. Part of her wanted to retreat, to laugh it off and turn this into a lighter moment. But another part, the deeper, quieter part, wanted to stay right there in the vulnerability. She looked back at the crowd and said, "When you spend years being seen as strong, you forget how to admit when you're scared." Tonight I didn't plan to say this, but when I walked out here, something told me I had to. The audience leaned closer again. Keanu lowered his head for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. When he lifted it again, there was no hesitation. "I remember once," he began, "when I was sitting alone, thinking I had nothing left. I felt like silence was my only friend. But I learned something that day. Silence is not emptiness, it's space. And in that space, you can hear things you've been too busy to notice. Your own heart, the kindness of others, the strength you forgot you had." The hall went still again. The sound of his voice was steady but carried an ache, as if every word had been pulled from a wound that had once bled. Sandra's eyes locked on his, and for a moment it felt as if there were only two people in the entire room. She wasn't just hearing him, she was feeling him. She knew his words came from a place of deep pain, the kind you don't share unless you want to offer someone else a lantern in their darkness. A young boy sitting near the aisle suddenly stood up. His voice trembled as he spoke. "I'm scared too." Every head turned. The boy couldn't have been older than 12, his small frame shaking as he clutched his mother's hand. His mother tried to pull him back into his seat, but Keanu raised his hand softly, signaling to let the child speak. "I'm scared my dad won't come home. He's sick and I don't know what will happen." The boy's voice cracked, and the hall filled with an ache so raw it made even the strongest eyes water. Sandra's breath caught in her chest. She stepped closer to the edge of the stage and crouched slightly, her eyes meeting the boy's. "Thank you for saying that," she whispered. "You're very brave to share it." The boy's mother had tears in her eyes, but she nodded, her hand trembling as she stroked her son's hair. Keanu spoke again, his voice softer than before but firm. "You're not alone, kid. You're never alone. Fear feels big, but it's never bigger than love. Hold on to that." The boy nodded, his lips quivering, but for the first time his shoulders relaxed just a little, as if he had been given permission to breathe. And then something unexpected happened. One by one, people in the hall began to share small pieces of their own fears. A woman whispered about losing her job. A man admitted he felt like he was failing as a father. Another voice said they were afraid of being forgotten. Sandra's eyes scanned the crowd, her heart trembling as she realized what was unfolding. This was no longer just her confession. It had become something far bigger, an unplanned gathering of truth, a space where people felt safe enough to lay down the fears they had carried in silence for years. She turned back to Keanu, her voice almost breaking. "Do you see what you started?" But Keanu shook his head gently. "No, it wasn't me. It was you. You opened the door when you shared your fear. All I did was walk through it with you." Her lips curved into a faint smile, though her eyes were wet. The audience wasn't clapping now. They weren't cheering. They were simply breathing together, feeling together. It was the kind of unity that can't be rehearsed, only born from truth. And yet, beneath the beauty of the moment, an unspoken question hung heavy in the air. How far could this truth go? What secrets, what fears, what hidden stories were waiting to come out next? No one knew it then, but that night was about to take a turn that would leave everyone in the hall speechless. The kind of turn that would remind them all that behind every smile, every brave face, there are battles most never see. This was no longer just Sandra's story. It was becoming everyone's. The hall seemed to breathe as one, yet the silence felt louder than any storm. People shifted in their seats, not because they were restless, but because something inside them was stirring. Fear had been spoken aloud, and in that moment, everyone in the room realized they were no longer just an audience. They were part of something much deeper. Sandra stood still, her hands gently clasped together as if holding on to keep herself grounded. Her heart was pounding, but her voice remained steady. "When that young boy spoke just now," she whispered, "I saw courage in its purest form. It reminded me of a time when I was younger, when I wanted to tell the world I was afraid, but I stayed quiet instead. I wonder how different things would have been if I had spoken then." The words lingered like a soft echo. People were leaning forward again, their eyes fixed on her, as if waiting for the piece of her past that she had just unlocked. Keanu's eyes softened, and he looked at her with that same steady calmness, the kind of calmness that didn't dismiss her pain but respected it. "Sometimes silence is survival," he said gently. But when we finally find the courage to speak, it can change everything. Just then, from somewhere in the hall, a voice broke through. "She's right," everyone turned. It was an elderly man with silver hair sitting near the aisle. His voice trembled, but carried a strength born from years of holding back. "I stayed quiet all my life. I lost my wife without telling her the words she deserved to hear. I stayed silent, thinking I had time. But time doesn't wait." His words struck like lightning. People's eyes filled with tears. The man lowered his gaze, ashamed, but Keanu didn't let the silence grow heavy. "Sir," he said softly, "thank you for telling us that. Silence may have taken something from you then, but speaking now is giving something to all of us. It's never too late to let your truth free." The man nodded, his eyes wet, and for the first time in years, he let himself cry in front of strangers. Sandra felt her chest tighten. She placed a hand over her heart and whispered, "This is what I was afraid of. That I would keep carrying my fears until the day I ran out of chances. But tonight I feel like maybe it's not too late." The room was no longer just an event hall. It had transformed into a sanctuary of honesty. People who had come expecting entertainment now found themselves holding mirrors to their own souls. Then, in the midst of that fragile stillness, the unexpected happened. A young woman, no older than 20, stood up trembling. Her voice cracked as she said, "I don't belong here. I came in by mistake. I didn't even buy a ticket. I just wanted to be somewhere warm for a while. But now I think I was meant to be here. Because I need to say this. I'm scared of going back home. It's not safe for me." The hall froze. Whispers rippled, not out of judgment, but out of concern. She hugged her arms tightly across her chest, her body shaking as if every word she spoke was being pulled from her bones. Sandra's eyes widened with empathy. She stepped closer to the edge of the stage. "You are safe here," she said softly. "Whatever you're facing, you don't have to face it alone tonight." The young woman looked at Keanu, her lips quivering. "Why does it hurt so much to tell the truth?" Keanu's answer was quiet but powerful. "Because truth cuts through the lies we use to protect ourselves. It exposes what we wish could stay hidden. But the same truth that hurts also heals. And you just gave yourself a chance to heal." The girl's knees weakened, but people around her reached out, strangers offering hands, shoulders, tissues. In that moment, the hall became something more than a gathering. It became a family, bound not by blood but by honesty. Sandra's voice carried across the room. "Every fear spoken tonight feels like a chain breaking. One by one, we're setting ourselves free." But even as the atmosphere filled with raw honesty and unexpected kindness, a shadow of suspense hung in the air. The audience could feel it. If tonight was breaking chains, then surely someone's secret, someone's truth, would be heavy enough to shake the room to its core. Then a man stood up at the far end of the hall. He was tall, with a face that carried lines of both strength and sorrow. His voice was low but steady. "I didn't come here to confess anything. I came here to test myself, to see if I could sit in silence while others spoke their fears. But now I realize my silence has been the loudest voice in my life. I have lived years hiding what I should have shared long ago. And if I tell it now, this hall will never be the same." A shiver ran through the crowd. Sandra froze. Keanu's eyes narrowed slightly, and every person leaned forward. The man's voice broke, heavy with weight. "My truth isn't about fear. It's about guilt." The hall went dead silent. Whatever was about to come out next was not just another story. It was something that could either heal or destroy the fragile unity that had been built. Sandra's heart raced, and Keanu's hands curled slightly as if bracing himself. The audience held their breath, because in that moment everyone knew the night was no longer just about fear. It was about to become a reckoning. The hall felt as if the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. The man's words, "My truth isn't about fear, it's about guilt," hung like thunder waiting to break. No one moved. No one coughed. The air was too heavy, too thick with suspense. Sandra's fingers curled around the edge of the podium, her breath shallow. Keanu stayed still, his calm eyes fixed on the man, not in judgment but in readiness, as though he knew the moment was fragile. The man's voice carried a tremor as he continued. "I spent years pretending I was someone I wasn't. I let people believe I was kind, honest, trustworthy. But the truth is, I failed someone who trusted me the most. A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. A woman gasped softly. The boy from earlier clutched his mother's hand tighter. The man drew in a deep breath, his hands trembling at his sides. She was my friend. She asked for help when she needed it most. I told her I was too busy, that I didn't have time. The next day, she was gone. I've lived every day since with the guilt that maybe if I had listened, she'd still be here. The silence was unbearable. People shifted, some wiping tears, others lowering their gaze as though afraid to look him in the eye. Sandra pressed a hand to her heart. Her voice broke softly. Thank you for being brave enough to share that. Guilt is a heavy chain. The man shook his head, his eyes glistening. I didn't come here to be thanked. I came here to face the truth I've hidden. I wanted to see if speaking it aloud would set me free, or break me even more. Keanu finally stepped forward, his voice calm but steady, carrying the weight of someone who had known sorrow. It doesn't break you, he said gently. It bends you. It teaches you. Guilt is proof that your heart still feels, still cares. You can't change the past, but you can let the truth guide you into something better. The man's knees buckled slightly, and he sank back into his seat, tears streaming down his face. Strangers reached out to him, hands on his shoulders, soft words of comfort. For a long moment, the hall was silent again, but this silence was different. It wasn't filled with fear or shame. It was filled with empathy. Then, Sandra spoke, her voice firmer now. All of us carry fears, guilt, and regrets. But tonight I've learned something. When we speak them aloud, they don't own us anymore. They become something shared, something lighter. The audience nodded, some openly crying, some quietly holding the hands of those beside them. But just as the room began to breathe again, another voice rose, sharp, angry, trembling with years of silence that had hardened into rage. What if the truth doesn't set you free? The voice came from a woman in the back row. She stood up, her hands clenched, her eyes burning with pain. Everyone turned to her, the tension snapping back like a taut wire. She stepped forward into the aisle, her words spilling out like fire. What if the truth only makes you bleed more? What if speaking it destroys the people around you? The room stiffened. Sandra swallowed hard and Keanu tilted his head slightly, studying her, listening carefully. The woman's voice cracked as she said, I've carried something for years. I never spoke it because I knew if I did, it would ruin lives. But tonight, hearing all of you, I can't keep it inside anymore. The audience leaned in, some terrified of what was coming, others desperate to know. The boy clung to his mother tighter. The elderly man who had confessed earlier wiped his eyes again. My husband, the woman whispered, her voice breaking, died in an accident. Everyone told me it wasn't my fault. But the truth is, it was. I was the one who asked him to leave that night. I begged him to go even though he was tired. And he never came home. A gasp echoed across the hall. Some people covered their mouths. Others shook their heads in disbelief, not at her guilt, but at the weight she had carried alone. Her knees gave way and she dropped into a chair, her sobs echoing through the hall. Sandra's eyes filled with tears. She took a step forward, her voice trembling but firm. You've punished yourself long enough. You didn't know what would happen. You made a choice out of love, not harm. No heart should have to carry that pain alone. The woman lifted her tear-streaked face. But I do carry it. Every day. Keanu's voice cut through, calm but powerful. And now you've shared it. And because you've shared it, you don't carry it alone anymore. We're all holding it with you. The room fell into silence again, but this silence felt sacred, as though everyone was kneeling before the weight of her truth. Then something shifted. People began to whisper words of comfort. One by one, strangers moved closer to the sobbing woman. Tissues were passed. Hands rested gently on her back. A community formed in seconds around her pain. Sandra looked out at the hall, her voice breaking. We came here tonight as strangers. But look at us now. Fear, guilt, regret. They've built a bridge between us. But even as the hall was slowly mending itself with compassion, there was a sense that the night still wasn't finished. Something else waited in the shadows of silence. Something larger, heavier, more unexpected. And it would not come from the audience this time. It would come from Keanu himself. For as Sandra wiped her tears and the woman was comforted by strangers, Keanu's expression changed. He looked down at the ground, his lips tightening as though words were pressing to escape, but had been trapped for years. Then, slowly, he lifted his head. His eyes scanned the hall, steady but filled with an ache so deep it made the air grow still again. "There's something I've never spoken either," he said quietly, "and maybe tonight is the night I finally should." Every heart in the hall stopped. The man who had comforted everyone else, the one who always gave strength in silence, was about to open a door no one expected, and the truth inside that door would change everything. A shiver swept across the hall when Keanu's words echoed, "There's something I've never spoken either, and maybe tonight is the night I finally should." The silence that followed wasn't ordinary. It was the kind that makes the skin prickle, the kind that makes people forget to breathe. Sandra's eyes widened, her lips parting slightly. She knew Keanu well enough to understand that he didn't speak about himself easily. He was the man of quiet presence, the one who listened more than he spoke, the one whose kindness showed in actions, not long speeches. For him to say this now meant something heavy, something that had lived inside him for years. The audience leaned forward, almost in unison, as if drawn by a magnetic force. Every ear strained to catch what he might reveal. Keanu's eyes lowered to the floor for a moment. His hand brushed against the side of his trousers nervously, a rare sign of restlessness. Then he looked up again, his gaze steady, but behind that steadiness was a shadow of sorrow. "All my life," he began, his voice low and careful, "people have looked at me and thought I was strong because I stayed quiet. But the truth is, I stayed quiet because I didn't know how to carry my pain without breaking others with it." The words landed heavy in the room. Some people gasped quietly. Sandra's chest tightened, her heart pulling toward him with silent compassion. He continued, his voice trembling slightly, though he fought to keep it calm. "Years ago, I lost someone I loved more than I can explain. It wasn't the first time I lost someone, but it was the one that shattered me. I told myself I had to keep moving, that I had to hide it, that nobody wanted to hear another man speak of grief, so I buried it under silence. I thought that was strength, but in truth, it was loneliness." A soft cry echoed from the back of the hall. People's eyes watered, not just because of what he said, but because of how deeply his pain reflected their own. Keanu paused, his breath shaky. "I've walked into rooms full of people, smiled, nodded, listened, and inside I was breaking. I thought silence was respect. I thought silence was love. But what I didn't see was that silence was also a wall." Sandra's throat burned as she listened. Her own fears from earlier suddenly felt lighter, because she realized that even the man who seemed unshakable had carried invisible storms. The young boy who had spoken earlier tugged at his mother's arm and whispered loudly enough for all to hear. "He's like me." The hall rippled with emotion. The boy's small voice cut through the tension like a blade of light. Keanu turned toward him and smiled faintly, tears shimmering in his eyes. "Yes," he said softly. "Like you. Like all of us." A hush fell again, and Keanu took a deep breath before pressing further. "I don't want my silence to be remembered as strength anymore. I want it to be understood for what it really was. A place where I hid because I was afraid. And maybe that's why I believe so deeply that kindness matters. Because when you have no words, kindness is the only language left." The audience broke. Some people sobbed openly, others held each other's hands tightly. Sandra had to step back slightly, her tears falling freely, her heart aching and healing at the same time. But then, something unexpected stirred in the room. A man from the middle row suddenly stood, his voice trembling with urgency. "Keanu, you gave me hope once." The room shifted toward him. His hands shook as he spoke. "I don't think you even knew. Years ago, I was standing outside a theater, broken, ready to give up on myself. You walked by. You didn't know me. You didn't even stop for long. But you smiled. You looked me in the eye like I mattered. And that moment, it stopped me from doing something terrible." A gasp spread through the crowd. The man's voice cracked as tears rolled down his face. That night your silence saved me. Keanu's lips parted, stunned. His chest rose and fell as he tried to hold himself steady, but his eyes betrayed him. They filled with tears. He shook his head gently, whispering, "I didn't know." The man nodded firmly. "You didn't have to. Sometimes one kind look is enough. Sometimes silence, when it carries love, is louder than any words." The hall erupted, not in cheers but in sobs, in murmurs, in the sound of hearts breaking open and being stitched back together at the same time. Sandra placed her hand over her mouth, her tears streaming uncontrollably. She whispered, almost to herself, This is why I was afraid of losing myself. Because moments like these remind me that even our smallest choices change lives." Keanu turned back to the crowd, his voice soft but resolute. "Maybe that's the truth we've all been circling tonight. Fear, guilt, grief, silence, they're not meant to crush us. They're meant to remind us of the weight of being human. But kindness, even the smallest kind, is what lets us carry that weight together." The hall shook with emotion. Strangers hugged each other. People whispered their gratitude. The woman who had confessed about her husband's death wept openly, her shoulders no longer burdened by isolation. The elderly man bowed his head, his tears flowing freely, and yet, amidst the healing, there was still suspense. Everyone knew the night wasn't finished. Something deeper still lingered, unspoken, waiting to surface. Sandra wiped her tears, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Keanu, you just shared something so powerful." "But I can feel it." "There's more, isn't there? Something you've never told anyone?" Keanu's jaw tightened. His eyes flickered with hesitation, then pain. "Yes," he whispered. "There's more. And it's the hardest truth of all." The entire hall leaned forward as if pulled by gravity. The moment was no longer about shared fears or guilt. It was about to uncover a truth so raw, so unexpected, that it could silence the world itself.